Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. Mark Davis had always known that life could be difficult, but he had never imagined it would come to this. At 23, he was struggling to make ends meet. Law school had been his dream, but the weight of his father's debts, combined with the burden of his mother's medical bills, had crushed any hope of a future without hardship. His mother's health was rapidly declining, and Mark was at the end of his rope. One evening, Mark received a phone call that would change everything. It was a woman named Eleanor Brooks, a wealthy and powerful businesswoman, offering him a solution he never thought he'd hear in his lifetime. He had no idea who she was at first, but her voice was calm and composed, the kind that made you listen, even when what she was saying sounded too good to be true. "Mr. Davis, I know about your situation," she said, her voice smooth and authoritative. "I have an offer for you. Meet me tomorrow at 7 p.m. at Brooks Bistro. We need to talk." He didn't know what to think. How could she know about his personal life, his debts? Still, with no other options, Mark agreed to the meeting, uncertain of what he was walking into. The next evening, Mark arrived at the bistro, drenched from the rain. He wasn't expecting anything special, but as he entered the warm restaurant, the rich smells of freshly brewed coffee and gourmet meals filled the air. He looked around and found her Eleanor Brooks, a striking woman with silver hair and an air of sophistication that matched the high-end atmosphere of the bistro. She was sitting at a corner table, her posture straight, her gaze unwavering as she waited for him. "Mr. Davis," she greeted, her voice calm but carrying an underlying power. "Please, sit down." Mark hesitated, glancing around the room. He was out of place here, in a restaurant like this, wearing a simple jacket and jeans, the remnants of his stress evident in the lines of his face. As he took his seat, she didn't waste time. "I know about your debts. Your father's medical bills, the struggles you've faced with law school, the pressure to provide for your mother. I can help you." Mark felt a flicker of hope. He leaned forward slightly, listening carefully. She continued, "I need a companion, someone to help me solidify my legacy. What I am offering you is a contract. You will marry me. I will take care of all your debts, provide for your family, and ensure your financial future. You will not have to work again." His mouth went dry. Marry her? A woman he had never met, for a contract, not love. It sounded absurd, impossible. But Eleanor was persistent. "Think about it. You're young, you're desperate, and I'm offering you a way out. I don't want romance, I just want a companion for the rest of my life. Nothing more, nothing less." She paused, letting her words sink in. "The choice is yours. But don't take too long. I won't make this offer twice." Mark sat in stunned silence, trying to absorb what she had just said. Could he really do this? Could he marry a woman for business reasons alone? What choice did he have? He needed the money to save his family, to keep his mother's treatments going. And here was a chance, an out that seemed too good to pass up. The next day, Mark returned to the bistro. He had thought long and hard, but he was still unsure. He walked in, his heart pounding. Eleanor was already there, sitting at the same table. When she saw him, she didn't say a word. She just nodded, as if she had already made up her mind that he would accept. "You've made your decision, then?" she asked. Mark nodded. "I'll do it," he said, though it felt like his soul was being sold to the highest bidder. Without hesitation, Eleanor smiled, but it wasn't the warm smile of a woman who had just found love. It was the smile of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. "Good," she said. "Let's begin our agreement." Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. Mark Davis had always known that life could be difficult, but he had never imagined it would come to this. At 23, he was struggling to make ends meet. Law school had been his dream, but the weight of his father's debts, combined with the burden of his mother's medical bills, had crushed any hope of a future without hardship. His mother's health was rapidly declining, and Mark was at the end of his rope. One evening, Mark received a phone call that would change everything. It was a woman named Eleanor Brooks, a wealthy and powerful businesswoman, offering him a solution he never thought he'd hear in his lifetime. He had no idea who she was at first, but her voice was calm and composed, the kind that made you listen, even when what she was saying sounded too good to be true. "Mr. Davis, I know about your situation," she said, her voice smooth and authoritative. "I have an offer for you. Meet me tomorrow at 7 p.m. at Brooks Bistro. We need to talk." He didn't know what to think. How could she know about his personal life, his debts? Still, with no other options, Mark agreed to the meeting, uncertain of what he was walking into. The next evening, Mark arrived at the bistro, drenched from the rain. He wasn't expecting anything special, but as he entered the warm restaurant, the rich smells of freshly brewed coffee and gourmet meals filled the air. He looked around and found her Eleanor Brooks, a striking woman with silver hair and an air of sophistication that matched the high-end atmosphere of the bistro. She was sitting at a corner table, her posture straight, her gaze unwavering as she waited for him. "Mr. Davis," she greeted, her voice calm but carrying an underlying power. "Please, sit down." Mark hesitated, glancing around the room. He was out of place here, in a restaurant like this, wearing a simple jacket and jeans, the remnants of his stress evident in the lines of his face. As he took his seat, she didn't waste time. "I know about your debts. Your father's medical bills, the struggles you've faced with law school, the pressure to provide for your mother. I can help you." Mark felt a flicker of hope. He leaned forward slightly, listening carefully. She continued, "I need a companion, someone to help me solidify my legacy. What I am offering you is a contract. You will marry me. I will take care of all your debts, provide for your family, and ensure your financial future. You will not have to work again." His mouth went dry. Marry her? A woman he had never met, for a contract, not love. It sounded absurd, impossible. But Eleanor was persistent. "Think about it. You're young, you're desperate, and I'm offering you a way out. I don't want romance, I just want a companion for the rest of my life. Nothing more, nothing less." She paused, letting her words sink in. "The choice is yours. But don't take too long. I won't make this offer twice." Mark sat in stunned silence, trying to absorb what she had just said. Could he really do this? Could he marry a woman for business reasons alone? What choice did he have? He needed the money to save his family, to keep his mother's treatments going. And here was a chance, an out that seemed too good to pass up. The next day, Mark returned to the bistro. He had thought long and hard, but he was still unsure. He walked in, his heart pounding. Eleanor was already there, sitting at the same table. When she saw him, she didn't say a word. She just nodded, as if she had already made up her mind that he would accept. "You've made your decision, then?" she asked. Mark nodded. "I'll do it," he said, though it felt like his soul was being sold to the highest bidder. Without hesitation, Eleanor smiled, but it wasn't the warm smile of a woman who had just found love. It was the smile of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. "Good," she said. "Let's begin our agreement." Mark returned home that evening with a heavy heart, his mind racing. The idea of marrying a woman he barely knew for a business arrangement felt strange, yet the weight of his family's financial burden made it feel like the only option. As he stepped inside his small apartment, the faint scent of his mother's old perfume lingered in the air. She was asleep in the next room, her shallow breaths reminding him of just how fragile their situation had become. His phone buzzed with a message. It was from Eleanor. "I trust you've made your decision. I'll have the papers ready for you tomorrow at the office. I expect you to be there at 10 o'clock a.m. He stared at the screen for a moment before putting the phone down on the kitchen counter. His mother needed care, his sister's tuition was overdue, and the debts kept piling up. Mark had tried everything, taken extra shifts, sold whatever he could, but nothing seemed to make a dent in the mountain of bills. The next morning, he arrived at Eleanor's office, still unsure about what he was getting himself into. The towering glass building stood in stark contrast to his own life, with its sleek, modern design that symbolized the wealth and power Eleanor held. He walked through the revolving doors, feeling out of place in his simple suit, and made his way to the elevator. It was a world he had never been a part of, and yet, here he was, about to enter it. The elevator doors opened to the top floor, where a reception area greeted him. The woman at the desk smiled politely as he approached. "Mr. Davis, right on time. Mrs. Brooks is expecting you." She gestured toward a set of double doors at the far end of the room. Mark nodded and stepped forward, his stomach twisting. Inside, Eleanor was standing by the window, gazing out at the city below. The soft hum of the city seemed so far away from the stillness of this office, and for a moment, Mark felt the weight of the world pressing down on him. "Mr. Davis," Eleanor said, without turning around. "I see you've come. Good. Please, take a seat." She didn't wait for him to sit before continuing. "The contract is simple. We'll live separate lives. You'll continue with your law studies, and in return, I'll take care of everything: your debts, your family, your future. I'll even provide you with a generous monthly allowance. In return, you'll attend public events with me, represent me in certain business dealings, and most importantly, you'll be my husband on paper." Mark felt his heart race. This wasn't what he had expected. He thought he'd simply sign a few papers and walk away. But hearing it from her lips, it suddenly felt real. A cold, transactional arrangement, not the warm embrace of a marriage built on love. Eleanor turned to face him, her piercing gaze locked onto his. "This isn't about affection, Mr. Davis. It's about security. You need it, and I need someone to stand by me in front of the world. You'll be compensated well for your trouble. All I ask is that you remain discreet and follow the rules of the agreement." He nodded, his mind whirling with thoughts of his mother's health, his financial woes, and the future he had been dreaming of, a future where he wasn't drowning in debt. Mark took a deep breath and said, "I understand." "Good," Eleanor said, handing him a set of documents. "Sign these, and we'll begin." As Mark signed the papers, he couldn't help but feel the weight of the decision. It felt like he was signing away his freedom, his future. But at that moment, he couldn't see another way. He was doing this for his family, for his mother's care, for his sister's future. When the documents were signed, Eleanor stood up and walked toward a large, ornate bookshelf. She pulled out a bottle of aged whiskey and poured 2 glasses, handing one to Mark. "To new beginnings," she said with a smile, though there was no warmth in her eyes. Mark raised the glass, his throat tight as he took a sip. It burned as it went down, but he couldn't focus on the taste. He was too busy thinking about the life he was about to start, a life that had nothing to do with love but everything to do with survival. As they finished their drinks, Eleanor stood and moved to the door. "Come, Mr. Davis. There's much to do. You'll need to attend a gala with me next week. It's important that you make a good impression." Mark followed her out of the office, the sound of his footsteps echoing in the vast, empty hallway. He couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted in him, that he was walking into a world he didn't belong to. But it was too late to turn back now. He had made his choice, and now, he would have to live with it. The next few days passed in a blur for Mark. He attended meetings with Eleanor, accompanied her to charity events, and posed for countless photos that painted a picture of a perfect couple, though the reality was far from that. Eleanor was a woman of few words when it came to personal matters, always keeping her distance and focusing solely on the business side of things. Mark followed her lead, remaining distant, as if he were living a life that wasn't truly his. As the days turned into weeks, Mark's new life became more routine. He still lived in his small apartment, though Eleanor had provided him with an expense account for the essential. He was doing his best to stay focused on law school, but it was hard to keep his mind from wandering. His mother's health was still deteriorating, and the weight of his responsibilities hung over him every moment of the day. One night, as they were preparing to attend yet another gala, Eleanor's assistant called Mark to let him know the event was running late. It was the perfect excuse for Mark to slip away for a moment. He stepped out onto the terrace of the grand ballroom, needing a breath of fresh air. The cold night air hit his face, clearing his head, but it didn't take long for him to realize that the moment of solitude wasn't as peaceful as he'd hoped. He heard footsteps behind him, and before he could turn, Eleanor's voice cut through the silence. "You're becoming more distant, Mr. Davis. Is everything all right?" Mark turned to face her. She stood there in a shimmering silver dress, her hair pulled back elegantly. Her cold, sharp eyes studied him, as though she were trying to decipher something he wasn't revealing. "I'm fine," Mark replied, offering her a tight smile. "Just needed some air." He hesitated for a moment, then added, "This life, it's a lot to get used to." Eleanor's gaze softened, just for a moment. "I know. But remember, this isn't just for you. This is about securing your future and ensuring your family is taken care of. You have a responsibility now." Mark nodded, though the words felt hollow. He knew what she was saying was true, his family needed him. But something about this arrangement made him feel more like a pawn than a partner. He was playing a role in her world, one he didn't fully understand. They stood there in silence for a few moments, the sound of laughter and clinking glasses filtering through the open door. Finally, Eleanor broke the quiet. "Come on, Mark. The night is young, and we have a show to put on," she said with a small smile. But there was something in her voice, a command that left little room for refusal. He followed her back inside, his mind still reeling from their conversation. He knew he had to keep playing the part, keep pretending this was just business. But as he stood beside her in the crowded ballroom, listening to the cheers and applause, something inside him shifted. He couldn't quite explain it, but for the first time, he felt like maybe there was more to this arrangement than just the money. It wasn't love, not yet. But in that moment, Mark realized that maybe, just maybe, this strange, business-only marriage could lead to something more, something that would change his life in ways he hadn't yet imagined. As the night wore on, Eleanor caught his eye across the room. She gave him a nod, a silent signal that their performance for the evening had gone well. Mark smiled back, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his chest. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he was beginning to feel that he wasn't as far from love as he once thought. The night ended with a flurry of pictures, handshakes, and congratulations. Mark walked back to the car with Eleanor, the weight of the night's events settling heavily on his shoulders. As they drove back to her mansion, he glanced out the window, lost in thought. Eleanor was silent beside him, but Mark felt like he was starting to understand her in ways he hadn't before. He was still living in a world that didn't quite feel like his own, but for the first time in weeks, he had a strange feeling that perhaps this was where he was meant to be. Maybe it wasn't love, but there was something about Eleanor that made him think there could be a future he never expected. As the car pulled into the driveway of the mansion, Mark took a deep breath. He wasn't sure where this strange marriage would lead, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was ready to find out. The days following the gala were a blur for Mark. He felt the distance between him and Eleanor growing ever wider, yet he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something had changed. He still lived in his small apartment, but his life had transformed in ways he hadn't anticipated. Eleanor's world of wealth and sophistication was like a shadow that loomed over his every decision, and he had begun to question whether he was truly living his life or simply existing in hers. One evening, as he was walking home from a late study session, Mark received a text message from Eleanor. It simply read, "Meet me at the penthouse tonight. 8 p.m. Don't be late." He frowned at the message, unsure of what was waiting for him. The tone of her text was different this time, more urgent, more commanding. Mark checked his watch and realized he had less than an hour to prepare. When he arrived at her penthouse, he was greeted by her assistant, who led him to the living room. Eleanor was already there, standing by the window, her back to him. The city lights illuminated her figure, casting a soft glow on her as she stared out into the night. The silence between them was thick, charged with unspoken words. "You're here," Eleanor said, turning around slowly. Her voice was softer than usual, but there was something in her eyes that Mark couldn't place. "You wanted to see me?" he asked, his voice betraying the nervousness he was feeling. Eleanor gestured to the couch. "Sit," she said. "We need to talk." Mark sat down, his heart pounding in his chest. He had no idea what this conversation would be about, but something told him it would be important. Eleanor paced the room for a moment before turning back to face him. "I've been thinking a lot about this arrangement, Mark," she said, her tone measured. "I know you've been doing what's necessary to keep up the appearance of our marriage. But I've realized something. This isn't just a business deal for me anymore." Mark stared at her, unable to mask his confusion. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Eleanor stopped pacing and took a deep breath. "I mean that somewhere along the way, I've begun to feel something I didn't expect. And I think you might feel it too." She took a step closer to him, her gaze softening. Mark's heart skipped a beat. He could feel the walls he had built around himself starting to crumble. But before he could say anything, Eleanor raised her hand to stop him. "I'm not saying that I'm in love with you," she continued. "But I've realized that this arrangement, this partnership, is more than I thought it would be. I've grown to trust you more than I ever thought possible." Her voice faltered for a brief moment before she regained her composure. Mark's mind was spinning. He had never expected this. He had assumed the entire marriage was just a business arrangement, something he had agreed to out of necessity. But hearing Eleanor speak like she wasn't sure how to respond. The lines between their fake marriage and something more real were starting to blur. "Eleanor, Mark started, but she raised her hand once again. "I don't want to rush anything, Mark," she said softly. "I just need you to know that I'm not just doing this because I have to. You've become someone I can rely on, someone I'm starting to care about in ways I didn't anticipate." Mark sat there, processing her words. A part of him wanted to pull away, to remind himself that this was still a business contract, that he couldn't let himself get too attached. But another part of him, the part that had spent years struggling, fighting for his family, felt a warmth stir within him. Eleanor's vulnerability, her honesty, touched something deep inside him. For the first time, Mark found himself considering the possibility that there was more to this marriage than he had realized. Maybe, just maybe, he could start to care about Eleanor in return. But he wasn't ready to admit that just yet. The silence between them stretched out for a few moments. Eleanor finally broke it by sitting down next to him. "I'm not asking for anything, Mark. Not yet. But I need you to understand something. You are no longer just the man I've hired to be my husband. You are someone I trust. And that means something to me." She reached out, her hand brushing against his. Mark's breath caught in his throat. He could feel the heat of her touch, but he couldn't bring himself to take her hand fully. His heart was conflicted, caught between the man he had been and the man he was becoming. In this strange marriage, he was starting to find a place for himself that wasn't just about survival. It was about connection. And that scared him more than anything. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air was thick with emotion, and Mark wasn't sure what to make of it. But one thing was clear: his life, and his marriage to Eleanor, was no longer just about a business deal. It was becoming something more, something neither of them had planned for. As Eleanor stood up to leave, she turned to him one last time, her expression soft. "I'll let you think about what I said," she said. "But whatever happens, just know that I'm here. And I'm not going anywhere." With that, she walked out of the room, leaving Mark alone with his thoughts. Mark sat there for a long time, the weight of her words pressing down on him. He had no answers, no easy way to move forward. But for the first time in a long while, he felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this strange, complicated life he had found himself in could lead to something more than he had ever dreamed. The next few days passed slowly for Mark. He kept replaying Eleanor's words in his mind, trying to make sense of them. He had always kept his emotions locked away, focusing on surviving, on providing for his family. But now, there was a crack in that armor, and he wasn't sure how to handle it. The warmth of her touch lingered in his thoughts, and he began to wonder if there could be something more between them, even though everything about their marriage was supposed to be strictly business. Mark found himself spending more time with Eleanor outside of their public appearances. She had invited him to attend a private dinner at one of her favorite restaurants, and though he felt nervous about stepping into her world again, he agreed. As they sat at a corner table in the dimly lit restaurant, the candlelight flickering between them, Mark felt a new tension in the air. Eleanor was different tonight. She wasn't the cold, calculated woman he had first met. Tonight, she was more open, more vulnerable. "How's school going?" Eleanor asked, breaking the silence as she took a sip of her wine. Mark hesitated for a moment before answering. "It's been tough. With everything else going on, it's hard to focus sometimes." He looked down at his plate, unsure of how much to reveal. Eleanor smiled softly, a knowing expression on her face. "I get it. Life can be overwhelming. But you're doing well. I see the effort you're putting in. It matters." Her words caught him off guard. He had expected her to talk about business, about the next charity event or upcoming deal, but instead, she was acknowledging the personal side of his life, something he didn't think she cared about. "Thank you," Mark said, his voice quiet. "I'm just trying to keep everything together. For my mom, for my sister. It's hard to balance it all." He looked up, meeting her gaze. Eleanor didn't look away. Instead, she leaned in slightly, her eyes soft. "I know what it's like to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders," she said, her voice low. "I've been there. But you don't have to do it alone. I'm here." She reached across the table, her hand resting lightly over his. Mark's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't sure what to do with the sudden warmth in her touch. He had always kept his emotions in check, never allowing himself to be too vulnerable. But in this moment, with Eleanor looking at him like she truly understood, he felt a shift in his feelings. He couldn't explain it, but something inside him stirred, something he hadn't felt in a long time. "I appreciate that," he said softly, his voice filled with uncertainty. "But I'm not sure if I'm ready to let anyone in. Not yet." He pulled his hand back, unsure of what to do next. Eleanor didn't push. Instead, she sat back in her chair, a small smile on her lips. "I understand. Take your time. You don't have to figure everything out tonight." She picked up her wine glass and took another sip, her eyes never leaving him. Mark was silent for a few moments, the weight of her words sinking in. He had spent so long focusing on survival, on his family's needs, that he had never considered what he needed. Could he really start to open up? Could he allow himself to feel something more than obligation toward Eleanor? As the dinner came to an end, they stood up to leave, and Eleanor placed her hand on his arm. "I know this arrangement started as a business deal," she said quietly, "but I think it's become something more for both of us. I'm not asking for love, Mark. But I'm asking for trust. Can you give me that?" Mark looked at her, his mind racing. Her words felt like a lifeline, but they also felt like a trap. He had never trusted anyone with his heart, especially not someone like Eleanor. But in that moment, standing close to her, he realized that maybe he didn't have to do everything on his own. Maybe it was okay to take a step forward, to allow himself to trust. He nodded slowly, a mixture of hope and fear in his chest. "I'll try," he said quietly. "I'll try to trust you." For the first time since their strange marriage began, Mark felt a small glimmer of something more, a possibility that maybe, just maybe, this could become something real. As they left the restaurant together, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that things were beginning to change between them. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, he felt like he might have a chance at a future that was his own, not just one built on survival. And for the first time, he wondered if Eleanor might be the one to help him find it. The days that followed their dinner felt different to Mark. Eleanor's words lingered in his mind, and though he tried to push them aside, they kept returning. "Can you trust me?" she had asked. For the first time, he found himself wondering if the walls he had built around his heart were too high, too strong. Eleanor had opened up to him in ways he hadn't expected, and while he hadn't fully accepted what she was offering, a part of him wanted to. He had spent his whole life fighting alone, but what if he didn't have to anymore? One evening, as Mark was sitting at his kitchen table, reviewing his notes for law school, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Eleanor. "I need you at the gala tomorrow night. It's important. Please be there." The request felt different this time. There was no business, no formal reason behind it, just a simple plea for him to be by her side. Mark stared at the message, his fingers hovering over the screen. He had grown accustomed to attending these events with her, always in the background, always playing the part of a supportive husband. But this time, it felt personal. What did she need from him? What was different about this gala? He couldn't shake the feeling that something significant was about to happen. The next evening, Mark arrived at the gala, his heart beating faster than usual. The grand ballroom sparkled with lights, the chandeliers casting soft glows on the polished floors. He could see Eleanor across the room, standing near the stage, talking to a few high-profile guests. When she saw him, her eyes lit up, and she excused herself from the conversation. "You came," she said, her voice soft but filled with a warmth Mark hadn't heard in a long time. "I'm glad." She reached out to him, her hand resting gently on his arm. "I have something I need to show you." Mark followed her through the crowd, his thoughts racing. They reached a quieter corner of the ballroom, where a large canvas was unveiled, the light above it highlighting the intricate details of the painting. It was a portrait of Mark, his face, his eyes, captured with such precision it almost felt like looking into a mirror. "Eleanor, what is this?" Mark asked, his voice filled with surprise. He hadn't expected this, didn't know she had commissioned a painting of him. "It's for you," she said simply, her voice calm and steady. "You've been more than just my business partner, Mark. You've become someone important to me." Her eyes searched his, as though trying to gauge his reaction. Mark stood there, his breath caught in his throat. He had never expected this. The whole purpose of their marriage had been to uphold appearances, to keep up the facade of a perfect union for the sake of business. But this felt like something more. He looked at the painting again, taking in every detail. The way his eyes were painted with such care, the way the artist had captured the essence of who he was, not just physically but emotionally. For the first time, Mark understood that Eleanor didn't just see him as a tool to help her build her empire. She saw him as a person. She saw him. "Eleanor, Mark began, but the words caught in his throat. He wanted to say something, wanted to tell her how much this gesture meant, how it made him feel like maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for something real between them. She smiled softly, sensing his struggle. "I know you're not ready to say it, Mark. But I wanted you to know. I'm not just asking for your trust anymore. I'm asking for you. I want this to be real, whatever this is, I want it to be real." Her voice was filled with sincerity, and for a moment, Mark felt like the weight of the world had lifted from his shoulders. Mark stood there, his heart racing. This wasn't just a business deal anymore. This wasn't just an arrangement. He could feel it now, the shift in their relationship, the warmth that had begun to bloom between them. He wasn't sure if he was ready to open up fully, to let her in completely, but he could no longer deny what he was feeling. "I'll try," he said softly, his voice filled with a quiet determination. "I'll try to trust you, Eleanor." It wasn't much, but it was a start. And in that moment, Mark realized that maybe he didn't have to walk this path alone. Maybe, just maybe, he had found something more than he ever imagined. As they stood together, staring at the painting, Eleanor's hand brushed against his. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes. Mark had no idea what the future would bring, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was ready to face it with someone by his side. Mark walked through the days following the gala with a sense of change in the air. Eleanor's confession, the painting, the way she had looked at him, had all shifted something inside him. It wasn't just a business arrangement anymore. He had started to feel something real, something he hadn't expected, maybe even something he was afraid of. Eleanor had opened up to him in a way that left him questioning everything he had known about his own feelings. He didn't know what it meant, but he couldn't deny that he was beginning to care for her. The next evening, they attended another event together, this one even more intimate than the last. A private dinner with a few high-profile clients of Eleanor's, meant to foster new business deals. But as they sat at the long, polished table, Mark couldn't help but notice how much things had changed between them. Eleanor's touch was lighter now, her gaze softer. Every word she spoke to him held a layer of meaning that had never been there before. It was as if their marriage was no longer just a contract, but a connection, one he hadn't expected. During the dinner, Eleanor turned to Mark, her eyes meeting his with a quiet intensity. "Mark," she began, her voice steady but filled with something deeper. "I know we started this as a business arrangement, but I need you to understand something. I've come to rely on you. More than just for business, more than just for appearances. I don't want to sound presumptuous, but I want you to know that you matter to me. What we're doing matters to me." Mark felt his heart beat faster, his mind racing. He had always been cautious with his emotions, never allowing himself to get too close, especially in a situation like this. But hearing her say those words, feeling the sincerity in her voice, it made something inside him stir. He hadn't expected this. He had assumed that he was just here to fulfill a role, a job. But now, it felt like so much more. He cleared his throat, unsure of how to respond. "Eleanor, I never thought this could become anything real," he admitted quietly. "I thought we were just going through the motions, keeping up appearances. But now, I'm not so sure. You've been there for me in ways I didn't expect, and I don't know how to process it." He looked down, struggling to find the right words. Eleanor reached across the table and placed her hand over his, her touch warm and reassuring. "It's okay, Mark. I didn't expect you to have all the answers. I just needed you to know how much you've come to mean to me. We don't have to rush anything, but I wanted to be honest with you. This is real to me." Her eyes held his, and for a moment, it felt like the rest of the world had faded away. Mark sat there, his mind still spinning. He didn't know what this was, what it could become, but he felt a connection to her he hadn't realized was possible. The walls he had built around himself, the walls he had used to protect himself from getting hurt, were slowly starting to crumble. He didn't know if he was ready to fully let go, to fully embrace what this could be, but the possibility of it felt more real than it ever had before. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur. Mark was lost in thought, trying to reconcile the feelings that were bubbling up inside him. He had spent so long being practical, focused only on the needs of his family, on surviving. But now, with Eleanor by his side, he felt like he was beginning to see a future for himself that was more than just a struggle to make ends meet. Maybe, just maybe, he could have something more. Something with her. As the evening ended and they stepped outside into the cool night air, Eleanor turned to him, her voice soft. "Mark, I know this hasn't been easy for you. I know you've been through a lot. But I want you to know that I'm here. Not just as your wife, but as someone who cares about you." Mark nodded, his throat tight with emotion. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he wasn't walking through it alone. Thank you, Eleanor, he said, his voice filled with quiet gratitude. I don't know what's next, but I'm starting to see a way forward. With you. The days that followed felt different for Mark. There was a sense of anticipation in the air, something unspoken between him and Eleanor, a quiet understanding that had begun to settle into their lives. They had grown closer, not just as partners in a business arrangement but as two people who had started to trust each other. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy, but there was a shift Mark couldn't ignore. One afternoon, Eleanor invited him to the office to discuss a new project she was working on. As they sat across from each other in the sleek conference room, the air between them felt charged. They had grown used to these meetings, to the formalities and the distance they had once maintained. But today, it felt different. Eleanor was no longer just the businesswoman who had hired him to be her husband. She was someone who had become integral to his life in ways he hadn't expected. Mark, I've been thinking about us, Eleanor said, her voice steady but carrying an emotion Mark hadn't heard before. I know we've been living this charade for a while now, but I want more. I want something real, with you. Not just as my husband for appearances, but as someone I care about. Mark's heart skipped a beat. He had heard her words before, but something about this moment made them feel more real, more urgent. He wasn't sure how to respond. He had spent so long keeping his emotions in check, hiding behind the walls he had built to protect himself from being hurt. But now, those walls were crumbling, and he was unsure if he was ready to face the truth of his feelings. Eleanor, Mark started, but Eleanor held up her hand, signaling him to stop. Mark, I'm not asking for perfection. I'm not asking for some grand gesture. I just need you to know that I want more than this. She took a deep breath, as if gathering her courage. I want us to move forward together, but I need to know if you're ready for that too. I need you to be honest with me, Mark. Can you trust me? Can you let me in? Mark sat there, his mind racing. Could he really let go of his fear? Could he allow himself to open up to Eleanor? The past few weeks had been a whirlwind, and part of him still clung to the idea that he was just playing a role in this marriage. But another part of him, the part that had started to care for her, was starting to wonder if this could be real. He took a deep breath, his hands gripping the edge of the table. I don't know, Eleanor. I've spent so long trying to survive, to protect myself and my family, that I've forgotten how to trust. How to let someone in. But I want to try. I want to see where this goes. With you. His voice was quiet, but there was a certainty in it that surprised him. Eleanor smiled softly, her eyes shining with a mix of relief and hope. That's all I needed to hear, Mark. We don't need to rush into anything, but knowing that you're willing to try means everything to me. She reached across the table and placed her hand on his. It was a simple gesture, but to Mark, it felt like a promise. They sat there for a moment, the weight of their conversation settling around them. There was no sudden revelation, no dramatic moment. But for the first time, Mark felt like he was no longer alone in this. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was beginning to live. As they stood up to leave, Eleanor looked at him with a smile that warmed him from the inside out. We'll take it one step at a time, she said softly. But I'm glad we're taking it together. Mark nodded, his heart lighter than it had been in a long time. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, he felt like he was ready to face it. With Eleanor by his side, he was ready to see what could come of this strange, complicated journey they were on together. The following weeks brought a sense of calm and excitement that Mark had never expected. Eleanor and Mark, though still navigating the intricacies of their marriage, were starting to form a real connection. Their relationship was no longer just about business or appearance, it had begun to feel genuine. They spent more time together outside of formal events, sharing quiet dinners at home, talking about their hopes, their dreams, and even their fears. For the first time in a long while, Mark allowed himself to imagine a future that didn't just revolve around survival but one that included someone else. Eleanor had shown him that there was more to life than just the struggle. It was a crisp Saturday morning when Eleanor took him by surprise. They were at her estate, enjoying a rare day off. Eleanor had arranged for a private breakfast on the patio, and as they ate, she looked at him with an intensity that made his heart race. Her hand rested on his, and her smile was soft, almost hesitant. "Mark," she began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I've been thinking a lot about everything we've been through. What started out as a business arrangement has turned into something I never thought possible. You've changed my life, and I want you to know that." She paused for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "I care about you. More than I've ever let myself care about anyone. And I want the susto be real. Not just a contract, but a partnership. I want to build a future with you. A future where we're not just surviving, but thriving, together." Mark felt a lump form in his throat. He had spent so much of his life building walls, protecting himself from getting hurt, and here she was, offering him something more than he had ever dared to imagine. She had asked him to trust her, and now, he realized he was ready to do just that. "Eleanor," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I never thought I'd be in a place like this. I never imagined I could have something like this. But you've made me believe that it's possible. I want the same thing. I want us to build something real." He squeezed her hand, feeling the weight of his words as they settled between them. Her eyes sparkled, and she leaned in closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then let's do it," she said, her smile widening. "Let's take the next step. Together." Mark's heart was full in a way he had never known. The past few months had been a whirlwind, full of uncertainty, but in this moment, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. He was no longer just going through the motions of life, he was living it. And he wasn't doing it alone. That afternoon, as they stood hand in hand on the estate's balcony, overlooking the vast gardens, Mark realized that this was the life he had been searching for all along. It wasn't perfect, and there would still be challenges ahead, but for the first time, he felt like he had found his place in the world. A place with Eleanor. Their journey wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about living, about building something meaningful together. And in that moment, Mark knew that whatever came next, they would face it side by side. Because together, they had built something that was stronger than any contract, any agreement. It was love. And that was enough.